Greetings again, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you. Thank you to all who are watching and hanging out with me. I'm Dustin Cormier. This is How to Rock Astrology. Continuing from our previous episode in the series, we're still talking about Chapter 3, Pluto as a Key to Transformation. Today in particular, we're going to have a little word about the transits of Pluto and what they mean, how they might express. We're not going to get into the details of Pluto transiting anything in particular because that happens later on in this book. This is just a part of this bigger series on a brief framework of what Pluto means in the chart. So this is the transits of Pluto. So, continuing on. Or I guess I should say, if you're watching this and you haven't been watching the previous episodes, feel free to just view from here, if you want to get the goods on what it might mean to experience a transit of Pluto. If that's what you came here for, you're in the right place. The function of the Plutonian energy can best be shown by looking into the meaning of Pluto's transits to important points in the natal chart. Later on in this book, Chapter 9 will discuss these transits in more detail, but it's necessary to touch upon them here in order to clarify the essential principle which Pluto represents. And maybe later on down the line we'll do a reading where we go through these transits. Pluto's transits are ordinarily concerned with the death and destruction of the old. It's Shiva. Shiva is considered in Vedic astrology to symbolize what Pluto means. Shiva is the god of destruction in Hindu theology. This destruction is necessary in order to make room for the new. CEO Carter writes that all eliminative processes are Plutonian, including those advocated by what is called nature cure. Advocates of the nature cure method of healing believe that in order for the person to be healed, all poisons, toxins, and other impediments to the flow of the life energy must be eliminated, thus allowing the natural healing forces to rebuild or regenerate, Scorpio, Pluto, to regenerate the body. Carter says that a boil is a good example of Pluto's action on a small scale, since it brings to the surface that which must be eliminated. This same Plutonian force began to be active on a larger scale at the same time Pluto was discovered, as seen in the Freudian approach to psychology, bringing to the light all repressed psychic material, and in the rise of Nazism, bringing to the surface the unsuspected demons that lurk beneath the facade of civilization. Transits of Pluto have a similar influence, bringing to the surface that which is ready for elimination, destruction, purgation, and, for better or worse, expression. For example, one of my clients came to me a few years ago on the verge of psychological collapse. He was paranoid and hysterical at the time, though he is usually extremely self-contained. He said he was having all sorts of paranoid fantasies about his lover. When we looked at the ephemeris to find out what transits were happening at the time, the experience he was going through was immediately clarified. Pluto, by transit, was in an exact square with his natal Venus. Hence, I explained to him that Pluto's transits had the effect of destroying old patterns of thought and behavior, as well as eliminating all sorts of psychic residue that were preventing his growth. Since Pluto was in square to Venus, his experiences naturally were affecting his emotional life and close relationships, and also his feeling of self-fulfillment. It was as if all the fears, ideals, fantasies, and expectations he had about love relationships had been immediately and forcefully brought to the surface and were being purged and eliminated in spite of this person's conscious wishes. This explanation helped him to get some sort of a perspective on what was going on deep within him. It's one of the great gifts of astrology. Although, of course, he still had to go through the full range of emotional experience. He seemed somewhat relieved after the consultation, and a few days later, he told me that he was making an appointment with a psychiatrist in order to help him get in touch with these deep feelings. Things calmed down somewhat after this transit had passed its most intense orb. But when Pluto turned retrograde and again came into the square with natal Venus, the same sort of experiences started up again, though this time with much less force. The third transit of Pluto, going direct once again, in square to this natal Venus, marked the end of this very long and difficult period of emotional transition. By the time the whole process was over, the man was much clearer about where he stood in relation to his girlfriend. He decided to put off marriage for the time being, and he seemed much more content with his everyday emotional life. In addition, all of his values, whether concerning love, marriage, money, or aesthetic preferences, underwent a total transformation, all things Venus. Judging now from the vantage point of a few years later, it is apparent that this one experience, although at the time painful and confusing, opened up doors to new insights and indeed to an entirely new outlook on life, which are still today deeply affecting his everyday attitudes. Pluto and its grip on any planet in the chart is bound to have this kind of effect. This one point about the transits of the Trans-Saturnian planets that cannot be overemphasized. I'll say it again. This is one point about the transits of these Trans-Saturnian outer planets that cannot be overemphasized. The long-term ramifications of these crucial change periods, these transits, and as well as dashas relating to it for Vedic people, will not become apparent until we have the clarified perspective which only time will bring. The changes that happen during these periods are so intense and so concentrated, while at the same time their full implications on the total life are so subtle that it is simply impossible for most individuals to assimilate within a short period of time the complete meaning of this transition from one phase of life to another. It may often take as long as 10 years for a person to fully grasp what indeed was happening on the deeper subliminal unconscious levels during these transformative phases. At the exact time of the mathematically precise transit, one has no perspective on what is happening. One often simply feels that the rug has been yanked out from under him, leaving him disoriented and with the realization that while the old is being irretrievably left behind, there's no place to stand, no firm and familiar guidepost to hold on to. It is a very insecure feeling, and it is often accompanied by simultaneous physical and or psychological symptoms of disintegration. It often seems to me that the actual experience of these transits, i.e. the transits of any of the Trans-Saturnian planets, the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, is not nearly so stress-producing as the resulting panic, fear, and anxiety, which quickly ensues in most people. Just the natural inherent resistance to change in all humans. Since human beings are creatures of habit, and therefore rarely inclined to give up the old and familiar security of past patterns of life, they usually resist such changes, which only has the effect of increasing the inner pressure and tension. The only thing that can get us through these periods with some degree of psychic balance left intact is a firm, unshakable faith in the wisdom and the order of life itself. This faith has to be based on real knowledge of universal laws and experienced grip on the interplay of these universal cosmic laws. For a sham faith that one clings to primarily out of fear inevitably collapses as soon as real challenge is confronted. This is one of the greatest values of astrology, for it can lead the individual to discover real and reliable knowledge about the universal laws which shape our life experience. It can give the individual a heightened perspective on his experience, a detachment which can eventually grow into wisdom. It's wonderful stuff. So, hence, although some astrologers hold that Pluto transits always bring about some kind of separation from people, things, or activities, we can see from the above example that Pluto operates on a level that is far deeper than that of mere transitory phenomena. I'm not saying that large-scale outer events never accompany such a transit. I am emphasizing that whether or not there are obvious external changes at the time, the meaning of the experience is never starkly obvious. For the changes at the deepest psychic level are so long-lasting and so profound that the analytical mind just cannot grasp their true purpose. It's like seeing a bizarre image in a dream that you know holds import for your soul, for the meaning of your life, but you can't analyze it because it's just too absurd and out of the reach of your conscious mind. In the above example, a separation did take place, but it was on a deep emotional level, through the elimination of life patterns that were no longer serving a useful purpose in the person's inner development. He was, therefore, separated from self-defeating and inhibiting psychological patterns. Although this is the person who had the square of Pluto to Venus. He was separated from self-defeating and inhibiting psychological patterns, although his relationship with a particular woman developed markedly in closeness and in depth, in his capacity to understand his own emotional needs and thus his ability to relate with other people more meaningfully. These grew at a rapid regenerative pace. Hence, although Pluto transits often coincide with the absolute and total end of an old phase of outward activity, or an overt mode of self-expression, they inevitably show us inwardly that it is time to let go of an old psychological pattern or approach to life which no longer serves any creative purpose. So the old phase represents that it's time to let go of an old psychological pattern or an approach to life which no longer serves any useful, joyous, creative purpose. This same idea is stated by Dane Rudhyar in his book, Triptych. It's a book that's mentioned several times in this series. When he refers to Pluto's influence as bringing about a freedom from bondage to forms and substances no longer useful to the individualized spirit. Pluto, by transit, therefore, symbolizes the power to release the more enduring from the transitory, whether it be the soul from the body at death, or the individual self from the old shell of personality and ego. Transiting Pluto brings to the surface hidden or subliminal conditions in order that this energy can be released from the old shell and transformed into a new source of consciously usable power. It's Pluto that has this integration principle, this grip, this visceral, through its force at its best, engages us with a visceral grip on the transcendental, transformative capacities that are inherent in all of us. We've been talking about how Uranus incites the genius understanding of necessary transformation. Neptune brings an emotional connection to the desire to transform, but doesn't necessarily break through that which obstructs that desire, that which obstructs the self from purging what needs to be left behind. It's Pluto that comes in, feels the heartfelt divine impulse of Neptune to yearn for something more high and pure and blissful to the soul. It's Pluto that comes in and cuts out all which is not that. And it often has to be done in this viscerally dark, tough way. But it turns it through this toughness, through this engagement. Pluto is the one that turns transformative energy into a grippable, tangible, consciously usable power. The action of transiting Pluto, the action of transiting Pluto always deals with both the light and the dark, Minerva, the old and the new. Hence, while Pluto often brings to the surface the remnants of the old, in order that they can be eliminated, it can also bring to light what the inner self has learned, and it can make manifest the essence of being, which endures. It's a very interesting thing to think about, how one can take all the karmas of the past and of what one is, and the pain and the emotional connections and the gestation and the neurological reaction to all phenomena. And Pluto can bring it into this deep, intense confrontation when it comes into transit. Now, the only way to really understand what the use and meaning and function and energy field reality of this confrontation of a Pluto transit, or even just Pluto by natal position. In order to really understand this dimension of Pluto, we need to talk about Pluto in terms of reincarnation and karma. And that is going to be the next episode in our series. So keep watching, folks, if you're interested. If you've been enjoying the transits of Pluto, I'm glad you watched this. We're going to have another video which is going to bring out the meaning of Pluto as relates to reincarnation and karma. This is more philosophical backdrops to help get us a grip on what Pluto means by transit and natal placement. So if you've been watching and if you're enjoying, check out that video next. And then after that, we're going to start talking about Pluto's house position, which is something I'm sure is going to excite everybody. Thanks for watching, folks.